In court, the mistress kicks the wife, not realizing the judge is her father. The sound of a high-heel shoe striking bone echoed through the marble hallway of the New York Supreme Court. I crumbled to the floor, clutching my shin in agony. Towering over me was Jessica, the woman who had stolen my husband, my home, and my dignity, smirking as she wiped her shoe as if she'd stepped in something foul. And right beside her, Richard, my husband of 10 years, didn't offer a hand. He just checked his Rolex. They thought this divorce was a done deal. They thought I was just helpless trash to be swept away. But as those heavy oak doors swung open, they were about to walk into a courtroom presided over by the most feared judge in the state, the father I had never told Richard about. The penthouse apartment on Fifth Avenue smelled of expensive leather and the remnants of a life that was about to be incinerated. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the rain slicking the streets of Manhattan. I was 32, but tonight I felt 100 years old. I wore a simple cotton dress, the kind I bought at Target, creating a stark contrast to the Italian marble floors beneath my feet. I had never been comfortable with the opulence. You see, when I met Richard Sterling 10 years ago, he was operating out of a garage in Queens, fixing motherboards, dreaming of a software empire. I was a waitress at a diner 2 blocks away. I was the one who brought him free coffee when he couldn't pay. I was the one who took a second job cleaning offices to pay for his first server hosting fees. I had built him, brick by brick, late night by late night. The sound of the front door unlocking snapped me out of my reverie. Richard walked in. At 40, he looked better than he ever had. Tailored Tom Ford suit, hair perfectly coiffed, smelling of sandalwood and arrogance. He didn't look at me. He rarely looked at me anymore. "Dinner is cold," I said softly, gesturing to the roast chicken sitting on the long mahogany table. "I ate," Richard said, tossing his briefcase onto the sofa. He walked to the liquor cabinet and poured himself a generous glass of Macallan 25. Finally, he turned to face me. His eyes, once warm and full of shared dreams, were now cold, hard flint. "We need to talk, Bella. Sit down." My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew this tone. It was the tone he used with employees right before he fired them. "I'm leaving you," he stated, taking a sip of the scotch. No stutter, no emotion, just a business transaction. I felt the air leave the room. "Rick, what is it? Is it because of the stress at work? We can go to therapy. I know I haven't been." "Stop!" he snapped, holding up a hand. "It's not stress, and it's not you. Well, actually, it is you. Look at you, Bella." He gestured vaguely at my simple attire. "I run a billion-dollar company now. Sterling Tech is about to go public on the NASDAQ. I need a partner who fits the part. You're still the waitress from Queens. You don't fit in my world anymore. You're an anchor, dragging me down when I'm trying to fly." "I worked 3 jobs for you," I whispered, tears welling up. "I sold my mother's jewelry to pay your first patent lawyer." "And I paid you back," Richard scoffed. "You've lived in a penthouse for 5 years. You haven't worked a day. We're even." He reached into his suit pocket and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the table. It slid across the polished wood and stopped right in front of me. "Divorce papers. I'm generous, Bella. I'm giving you the apartment in Queens, the old one, and a monthly stipend of $2,000 for 2 years. Sign it and we can make this clean." $2,000. I looked at him in disbelief. "Richard, the lawyers, the assets. We don't have a prenup. Half of this company is legally mine." Richard laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. "Legally? You think you can fight me legally? I have a team of 12 sharks on retainer who cost more per hour than you made in a decade waiting tables. If you fight me, I will bury you. I will drag this out until you are homeless and starving. Take the deal." "Is there someone else?" I asked, my voice trembling. Richard checked his watch again. "Her name is Jessica, and unlike you, she knows how to dress for a gala. She's waiting in the car." Pack a bag, Bella. I want you out by tonight. I didn't take the deal. I refused to sign. 3 weeks later, I was living in a cramped studio apartment in the Bronx, paid for by the last of my savings. Richard had frozen our joint accounts the morning after he kicked me out. He claimed unusual spending activity to the bank, and with his status, they believed him over me. I had spent days calling lawyers. Every time I mentioned the name Richard Sterling, the conversation changed. Sorry, conflict of interest. We aren't taking new clients. Mr. Sterling is a very powerful man, Mrs. Sterling. Unless you have a retainer of $50,000 upfront, we can't help you. I was being walled off. Richard wasn't just divorcing me. He was blockading my entire existence. On a rainy Tuesday, I sat in a coffee shop near the courthouse, clutching a lukewarm tea. I was meeting a public defender, my last hope. But before the lawyer could arrive, a shadow fell over my table. So this is what rock bottom looks like. It's charming, really. Very rustic. I looked up. Standing there was Jessica Vance. She was stunning in a way that felt manufactured. Perfect blonde extensions, lips filled to pouty perfection, and a red Versace trench coat that cost more than my entire childhood home. What do you want, Jessica? I asked, gripping my cup to stop my hands from shaking. Jessica pulled out a chair and sat down without asking, looking around the coffee shop with undisguised disgust. Rick is getting impatient, sweetie. You're being difficult. He offered you the Queen's apartment. Why are you clinging on? It's pathetic. I helped build that company, I said, my voice finding a sudden steeliness. I'm not walking away with nothing while you spend the money I sweated for on plastic surgery. Jessica's eyes narrowed. She leaned in, her perfume overpowering the smell of stale coffee. Listen to me, you little mouse. Rick doesn't love you. He pities you. And me? I'm the future. I'm the face of Sterling Tech now. We have the gala next week, and the press is going to love us. You are just a stain we're trying to scrub out. Jessica reached into her purse and pulled out a check. She slid it across the table. $10,000. Cash. Jessica smiled sweetly. Take it, sign the papers, and disappear. Go back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of. I looked at the check. It was humiliating. It was a payoff to erase 10 years of love and sacrifice. I picked up the check, looked Jessica in the eye, and slowly ripped it in half. Then I ripped it again. Get out of my face, I said. Jessica's face twisted into a mask of pure rage. She stood up abruptly, knocking the chair back. You're going to regret that. We have the best lawyer in the city, and we drew Judge Caldwell for the hearing. Do you know who Arthur Caldwell is? They call him the hangman. He hates gold diggers. Rick's lawyers have already painted you as a lazy, cheating leech. You're going to walk out of that court with zero. Jessica turned on her heel and strutted out, leaving me shaking. I stayed at the door. Judge Arthur Caldwell. The name sent a shiver down my spine, but not for the reason Jessica thought. I pulled my cracked iPhone from my pocket. My hands were trembling as I scrolled down to a contact I hadn't called in 15 years. The name saved was simply him. I hesitated. Calling him meant opening a door I had slammed shut when I was 18, running away from a life of suffocating expectations and strict rules. It meant admitting I had failed. But I thought of Richard's cold laugh. I thought of Jessica's smirk. I pressed dial. It rang 4 times. Then a deep, gravelly voice answered. This is a private number. Who is this? Hello, Father. I whispered. It's Bella. I need help. There was a long silence on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Bella, the voice said, devoid of warmth, but full of power. 15 years. You call me after 15 years. I know, I sobbed. I'm sorry. You were right about everything. He destroyed me. Sterling, the voice asked sharply. The man you ran off with. Yes. I see. The sound of a pen scratching on paper came through the line. Meet me in courtroom 4B tomorrow at 9 a.m. Don't be late. And Bella, yes, wear something blue. It brings out your eyes. If you're going to war, you dress for war. The line went dead. The morning of the hearing, the courthouse was a zoo. Richard Sterling's divorce was high-profile news. Paparazzi lined the steps, their flashbulbs popping like lightning storms. I arrived in a taxi. I wore a navy blue pencil suit I had found at a consignment shop. It was old, but it fit me perfectly, giving me an air of dignity I hadn't felt in months. I kept my head high, ignoring the questions shouted by reporters. Bella, is it true you cheated on Richard? Bella, are you asking for 50 million? Richard's PR team had been busy leaking lies. I made it through security and entered the long marble hallway leading to courtroom 4B. The air was thick with tension. At the far end, I saw them, Richard and Jessica. They were surrounded by a phalanx of lawyers in grey suits. They looked like royalty holding court. Richard was laughing at something a lawyer said. Jessica was checking her makeup in a compact mirror. As I approached, the group went silent. Richard looked me up and down, a sneer curling his lip. Well, look who showed up, Richard said, loud enough for the other people in the hallway to hear. I thought you'd be on a bus to Ohio by now. I'm here for what's mine, Richard, I said calmly. Jessica stepped forward, placing a possessive hand on Richard's chest. Yours? Nothing is yours, honey. You were a bad investment. And today, we're liquidating you. Move, Jessica, I said, trying to step around her to get to the courtroom doors. Jessica stepped into my path, blocking me. The hallway was crowded, but people were keeping their distance, watching the drama unfold. You don't talk to me like that, Jessica hissed, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You are nothing. You are a waitress, a servant. You should be thanking Rick for not leaving you on the street years ago. I said, move, I said, my patience snapping. I brushed past Jessica's shoulder. It happened in a split second. As I passed, Jessica, fueled by entitlement and rage, lashed out. She swung her leg back and kicked me hard in the shin with the pointed toe of her Louboutin stiletto. The pain was blinding. It wasn't a shove. It was a vicious, calculated assault. I cried out, my leg buckling. I collapsed onto the cold marble floor, clutching my shin. The pain radiated up my leg, white hot and throbbing. The hallway went silent. Oops, Jessica said loudly, feigning shock, her hand covering her mouth in a mock gasp. She tripped. Did you see that, Rick? She's so clumsy. Probably drunk. Are you drunk, Bella? At 9 a.m. I looked up from the floor, tears of pain stinging my eyes. Richard was looking down at me, not with concern, but with annoyance. Get up, Bella, Richard hissed. Stop making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. She kicked me. I gasped, trying to stand, but my leg wouldn't support my weight immediately. Nobody saw anything, Jessica smirked, looking around at Richard's lawyers, who all averted their gazes or shook their heads. You fell because you're weak. Jessica stepped closer, leaning down so only I could hear. Stay down. It's where you belong. Under my boot. I gritted my teeth. The physical pain was agonizing, but the humiliation burned hotter. I looked at the closed doors of courtroom 4B. Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open. Order! A bailiff shouted from inside, his voice booming into the hallway. All rise for the Honorable Justice Arthur Caldwell. Richard adjusted his tie, looking at his reflection in the glass of the door. Show time, Jessica. Let's go finish this. He stepped over my legs as if I were a piece of luggage. Jessica followed, deliberately grinding her heel into the floor inches from my hand, before strutting into the courtroom. I was left alone on the floor for a moment. A young clerk rushed over to help me up. Mom, are you okay? The clerk asked. I grabbed the clerk's arm and pulled myself up. I dusted off my knees. The pain in my shin was a sharp throb, but something else had taken over, a cold, quiet fury. "I'm fine," I said, my voice steady. "I'm just fine." I limped toward the doors. They thought I was broken. They thought they had the upper hand because they had the money and the lawyers. But as I pushed open the doors to courtroom 4B, I looked toward the bench. Sitting high above everyone, bathed in the glow of the court seal, was a man with silver hair and eyes that looked like frozen steel. Judge Arthur Caldwell. Richard and Jessica were already seated at the plaintiff's table, whispering and giggling. They didn't look at the judge. If they had, they might have noticed that the terrifying hangman was staring directly at the woman limping down the aisle. And for the first time in 15 years, his eyes weren't filled with judgment. They were filled with a chaotic, terrifying rage directed solely at the man in the expensive suit who had just stepped over his daughter. The courtroom was freezing, kept at a temperature designed to keep tempers low and alertness high. I sat alone at the defendant's table. The wood felt cold under my fingertips. To my right, Richard's table was crowded. He had 3 lawyers, 2 paralegals, and Jessica, who was sitting in the front row of the gallery directly behind him, leaning forward to whisper in his ear. Richard's lead attorney, Marcus Thorne, stood up. He was a man known in New York legal circles as the bulldozer. He didn't just win cases, he annihilated the opposition. He adjusted his silk tie and approached the bench. "Your Honor," Thorne began, his voice smooth as velvet. "We are here today to expedite the dissolution of a marriage that has, frankly, been over for years. My client, Mr. Sterling, is a man of significant stature. He has built an empire from scratch." The respondent, Mrs. Sterling, he gestured dismissively toward me without looking at me, has been a passive observer, a dependent. We have prepared a settlement that is more than generous, considering she contributed 0 equity, 0 intellectual property, and 0 labor to Sterling Tech. I gripped the edge of the table. "That's a lie," I whispered, though my voice was drowned out by the hum of the courtroom air conditioning. "Furthermore," Thorne continued, pacing in front of the judge's bench, "we have evidence suggesting that Mrs. Sterling is mentally unstable. We believe her refusal to sign the initial agreement is driven by vindictiveness and a disconnect from reality. We are asking for an immediate summary judgment enforcing the pre-separation agreement, the Queen's apartment, and a 2-year stipend." Judge Arthur Caldwell sat motionless. He had not looked at the files in front of him. His eyes were fixed on Marcus Thorne. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said. His voice was quiet, but it carried a resonance that made the court reporter look up sharply. "You used the phrase, generous. Can you define that for me in the context of a 10-year marriage?" Thorne blinked. He wasn't used to judges asking philosophical questions. "Well, Your Honor, considering she brought nothing to the table, nothing." Judge Caldwell interrupted. "No financial support, no emotional support, no domestic labor that allowed your client to focus on his work. Domestic labor is hardly comparable to coding a billion-dollar algorithm," Thorne scoffed, smiling at Richard. Richard smirked back. "I see," the judge said. He slowly turned his head to look at me. For a second, his eyes softened, noticing the way I was rubbing my injured shin beneath the table. Then the steel returned as he looked back at Richard. "Mr. Sterling, please take the stand." Richard looked surprised. "Now, my lawyer hasn't finished his opening statement." "This is my courtroom, Mr. Sterling," Caldwell said. "I run it on my time. Take the stand." Richard sighed theatrically, buttoned his jacket, and walked to the witness box. He swore on the Bible with a look of boredom. "Mr. Sterling," the judge said, leaning forward, "you claim you built Sterling Tech entirely alone. Is that correct?" "Absolutely, Your Honor," Richard said, projecting his voice for the press at the back of the room. "I spent thousands of hours coding. I built the hardware. It was my genius." And during those thousands of hours, the judge asked, "Who paid the rent?" Richard paused. "Excuse me." The rent. Caldwell repeated. You were living in a garage in Queens 10 years ago. Who paid the rent on that garage? Who paid for the electricity that powered your servers? Who bought the food you ate while you were being a genius? Richard shifted in his seat. I had savings. You were 22 and unemployed, the judge said, glancing at a piece of paper he had just pulled from a folder. I had submitted. A folder Thorne hadn't even bothered to read. According to Mrs. Sterling's affidavit, she was working double shifts at a greasy spoon diner. She paid the rent. She paid the electric bill. Is this false? Richard glared at me. She bought groceries. Big deal. That doesn't entitle her to half my stock options. It establishes a partnership, the judge said coolly. You see, Mr. Sterling, in the eyes of the law, a marriage is an economic partnership. If she feeds the horse, she owns a part of the plow. She's a waitress. Richard snapped, losing his cool for the first time. She's a nobody. I'm the one on the cover of Forbes. And yet, the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, without that waitress, the man on the cover of Forbes would have starved to death in a garage in Queens, wouldn't he? The courtroom went silent. Thorne jumped up. Objection. Relevance. Overruled. Caldwell slammed the gavel down. The sound was like a gunshot. Sit down, Mr. Thorne. I am establishing the foundation of the assets, and I am finding your client's memory selective. I watched in shock. I had expected my father to be tough, but I hadn't expected him to know the details. I realized then that he must have read every letter I had sent him over the years. The letters he had never answered. He knew. He had always known. The questioning continued for an hour. Richard, usually smooth and in control, was sweating. Judge Caldwell wasn't letting him use corporate buzzwords. He was drilling down into the gritty reality of the early years. Let's talk about the angel investor who saved you from bankruptcy in 2018, Caldwell said, looking at his notes. Richard brightened. Yes, a pivotal moment. I secured $50,000 to upgrade our servers. And where did that money come from? Caldwell asked. It was a private loan, Richard said vaguely. From whom? An associate. Mr. Sterling, Caldwell said, taking off his glasses and cleaning them slowly. Perjury is a felony. I will ask you one more time. Where did the $50,000 come from? I stood up slowly. My leg was throbbing, but I needed to speak. Your Honor. Yes, Mrs. Sterling. Caldwell looked at me gently. It wasn't an associate, I said, my voice trembling but clear. It was my mother's engagement ring. A 3-carat vintage diamond. I inherited it when she passed. Richard told me the company was going to fold. He cried in my lap, so I sold it. I gave him the cash in a brown paper bag. The gallery murmured. Reporters were furiously typing on their phones. Judge Caldwell looked at Richard. Is that true, Mr. Sterling? Richard's face turned red. I intended to buy it back, but the company took off and we forgot about it. You forgot? Caldwell repeated flatly. You forgot that your wife sold her only heirloom from her dead mother to save your career. It was an investment. Richard shouted. And I paid her back. She lives in a penthouse. She wears designer clothes. She should be grateful. Grateful. Caldwell's eyes narrowed. For what? For being traded in the moment she became inconvenient. Jessica, unable to help herself, let out a loud, scoffing laugh from the gallery. Caldwell's gaze snapped to her instantly. It was the look a lion gives a hyena. Is something funny, miss? Caldwell asked. Jessica froze. She stood up, flipping her hair over her shoulder. I'm sorry, Judge. It's just this is ridiculous. Bella is playing the victim. She's a great actress. And who are you? Caldwell asked, though he clearly knew. I'm Jessica Vance, she said proudly. Mr. Sterling's fiancée, and the Chief Marketing Officer of Sterling Tech. Ah, Caldwell said. The mistress. Jessica bristled. The fiancé. We'll see, Caldwell said ominously. Since you seem so eager to participate, Miss Vance, why don't you approach the bench? In fact, take the stand. Mr. Sterling, step down. Thorne panicked. Your Honor, Miss Vance is not on the witness list. This is highly irregular. I have wide latitude in my courtroom to determine the truth of character and conduct, Caldwell said. And since character is a key component in determining alimony and asset division in this state, I want to hear from the woman who finds this proceeding ridiculous. Bailiff, swear her in. Jessica walked to the stand, her heels clicking loudly. She looked confident. She thought she could charm the old judge. She smiled at him as she sat down. State your name, the bailiff said. Jessica Vance. Judge Caldwell stared at her for a long moment. He didn't smile back. Miss Vance, Caldwell began. You arrived at the courthouse with Mr. Sterling this morning, correct? Yes, Your Honor. And you encountered Mrs. Sterling in the hallway outside courtroom 4B. Briefly, Jessica said, looking at her fingernails. Describe that encounter. We walked past her, Jessica lied effortlessly. She was acting erratic, shouting at us. She seemed intoxicated, honestly. She stumbled and fell. Rick tried to help her, but she swatted him away. I gasped. That is a lie. Quiet, Mrs. Sterling, Caldwell said, though his tone wasn't harsh. He turned back to Jessica. So she fell on her own. Yes, Jessica said, widening her eyes innocently. She's very clumsy and frankly a bit unstable. It was sad to watch. I see, Caldwell said. He reached under his bench and pulled out a remote control. He pointed it at a large flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall to the left of the jury box. Miss Vance, Caldwell said, his voice dropping an octave. Are you aware that the New York Supreme Court recently upgraded its security system? Every hallway, every corridor, and every elevator is monitored by 4K high-definition video with audio. Jessica's smile faltered. The color drained from her face beneath her bronzer. Richard, sitting at his table, suddenly looked very pale. Let's watch the clumsy fall, shall we? Caldwell pressed a button. The atmosphere in courtroom 4B had shifted from a sterile legal proceeding to something far more volatile. The air conditioning hummed a low drone that seemed to vibrate against the tension in the room. Judge Arthur Caldwell sat behind the high mahogany bench, his face unreadable, a stone mask carved from years of passing judgment on the worst of humanity. He stared at Jessica Vance. Jessica sat in the witness box, crossing her legs elegantly, adjusting the hem of her red Versace coat. She looked bored, almost annoyed that she had to be there at all. In her mind, this was a formality. She was the future Mrs. Sterling. The man in the black robe was just a government employee, a hurdle to be cleared on her way to a champagne lunch. Ms. Vance. Judge Caldwell began, his voice dropping to a register that was dangerously soft. I want to be absolutely clear before we proceed. You are under oath. Do you understand the gravity of that? Jessica let out a small, breathless laugh, flashing a perfect, practiced smile at the court reporter. Of course, Your Honor. I'm telling the truth. Bella is, well, she's been spiraling for months. Richard has tried so hard to help her, but you can't help someone who wants to be a victim. The fall in the hallway was just sad. She tripped over her own feet. She tripped. Caldwell repeated, writing something down on his legal pad. The scratching of his pen was the only sound in the room. And you and Mr. Sterling attempted to assist her. We did. Jessica lied effortlessly, her eyes wide and innocent. Rick reached out to catch her, but she swatted him away. She was screaming obscenities. It was frightening, actually. I felt unsafe. At the defendant's table, my knuckles turned white as I gripped the edge of the wood. I wanted to scream, to stand up and call Jessica a liar, but I felt my lawyer's hand on my arm, holding me down. I looked up at the judge, at my father. His eyes flickered toward me for a split second, a microscopic signal. Wait, you felt unsafe. Caldwell mused. He took off his glasses and set them on the bench. He looked tired, or perhaps he looked like a predator who had just finished setting a snare. It is interesting you say that, Ms. Vance, because the architecture of memory is a fragile thing. Sometimes we remember what we want to have happened rather than the objective reality. Richard Sterling, sitting at the plaintiff's table, loosened his tie. He didn't like where this was going. He leaned over to his attorney, Marcus Thorne. Why is he lecturing her? Why aren't we moving to the asset division? Quiet! Thorne hissed, his eyes fixed on the judge. Something is wrong. Judge Caldwell reached under the lip of his bench and produced a small black remote control. He held it up, inspecting it as if it were a curious artifact. The New York Supreme Court is a historic building, Caldwell said, his voice rising slightly, projecting to the back of the room where the press gallery was packed shoulder to shoulder. But last year, we underwent a significant modernization. We had a problem with security blind spots. So, the state installed a redundant 4K high-definition surveillance system. Every corridor, every elevator, every stairwell, it records audio and video in real time. Jessica's smile faltered. The corners of her mouth twitched. She uncrossed her legs. Ms. Vance, Caldwell said, pointing the remote at a massive flat-screen monitor mounted on the wall to the left of the jury box. The screen was currently black, a dark void reflecting the fluorescent lights. Let's see if the camera remembers the incident the same way you do. The room went deathly silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing, her hands hovering over the keys. Caldwell pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. The resolution was startlingly crisp. It showed the hallway outside courtroom 4B from a high, wide angle. The timestamp in the corner read 8:55 a.m. There was Bella, walking slowly, her posture upright despite her frayed coat. She looked dignified. Then the frame filled as Richard and Jessica entered from the left, surrounded by their entourage of lawyers. The audio crackled through the courtroom speakers, slightly tinny, but undeniably clear. Yours? Nothing is yours, honey. You were a bad investment. Jessica's voice echoed through the room, shrill and dripping with malice. In the witness box, the real Jessica went pale. She gripped the railing in front of her. On the screen, the confrontation escalated. The entire courtroom watched as Bella tried to step around the couple. They watched as Jessica stepped deliberately into her path. Then came the moment that sucked the air out of the room. It wasn't a stumble. It wasn't a trip. The camera captured the motion perfectly. Jessica shifted her weight, swung her right leg back, and drove the pointed toe of her designer stiletto into Bella's shin with the precision of a soccer player taking a penalty kick. Crack! The sound of the impact on the video was sickening. A sharp, distinct thud of hard leather against bone. On screen, Bella crumbled. She hit the floor hard. Then came the aftermath on the video. Jessica looked down at the writhing woman and smirked. Oops! She tripped. Did you see that, Rick? She's so clumsy. And then Richard, the billionaire CEO, the man who claimed to be a benevolent ex-husband, he stood over his wife checking his Rolex. Get up, Bella. Stop making a scene. You're embarrassing yourself. The video froze, paused by Judge Caldwell. The image of Jessica's smirk and Richard's indifference was frozen in 4K resolution, looming over the courtroom like a billboard of their cruelty. Judge Caldwell slowly placed the remote back on the bench. He turned his chair to face the witness box. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. That, Caldwell said, his voice shaking with a suppressed, volcanic rage, did not look like a woman tripping over her own feet, Ms. Vance. Jessica was trembling now. Her composure had disintegrated. The angle is bad. It looks worse than it was. I didn't mean to contact her. Contact her! Caldwell roared, the sudden volume making half the gallery jump. He slammed his hand onto the bench. You kicked a litigant in my courthouse. You assaulted a woman and then walked into this room, placed your hand on a Bible, and lied to my face. That is perjury, Miss Vance. That is assault. That is a mockery of this institution. Jessica looked wildly toward Richard. Rick, do something. He's yelling at me. But Richard Sterling was paralyzed. He was staring at the frozen image on the screen, seeing his own callousness reflected back at him. He saw the reporters in the back row typing furiously on their phones. He saw the live stream indicators. He knew in that second that his reputation was incinerating. Mr. Thorne. Caldwell barked at Richard's lawyer. Does your client have an explanation for why he stood by and watched an assault? Thorne stood up, looking pale. Your Honor, my client. He didn't see the impact. He was distracted. Distracted. Caldwell repeated with biting sarcasm. He was checking his watch while his wife lay on the floor. The judge turned back to the bailiff, a burly man who had been watching the video with a scowl. Bailiff, Caldwell ordered, take Ms. Vance into custody immediately. The charge is perjury in the first degree and assault in the second degree. Remand her to the holding cells until arraignment. No. Jessica shrieked as the bailiff moved in. She stood up, knocking over her chair. You can't arrest me. I'm Jessica Vance. Tell him we have a gala tonight. The bailiff didn't care about the gala. He spun Jessica around. The click-click of handcuffs echoed loudly in the stunned courtroom. Rick! Jessica screamed as she was hauled toward the side exit, her red coat trailing on the floor, her dignity gone. Call the governor. Fix this. The door slammed shut behind her, cutting off her screams. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the scratching of pens and the harsh breathing of Richard Sterling. Judge Caldwell didn't sit back. He remained leaning forward, his eyes locked on Richard. Now, Caldwell said, his voice low and dangerous, we are left with you, Mr. Sterling, the man who builds empires, the man who claims he owes his wife nothing. Richard stood up, his legs shaking. Your Honor, look, Jessica is. She's volatile. I didn't know she was going to do that. I'm a victim here, too. A victim? Caldwell scoffed. You are an accomplice to the degradation of a human being. And earlier you claimed my daughter. Excuse me, the defendant contributed nothing to your success. You claimed she was a burden. She was. Richard insisted, trying to regain some ground. She's uneducated. She's a waitress. She doesn't understand my world. Your world. Caldwell mused. A world of lies, appearances, and cruelty. The judge stood up slowly. He reached for the zipper of his black judicial robe. A murmur went through the crowd. Judges never removed their robes in session. Caldwell pulled the zipper down and shrugged the heavy black fabric off his shoulders. It pulled on the chair behind him. He stood revealed in a crisp white shirt and a dark tie. He looked less like a judge and more like a man ready for a fight. He walked down the steps from the bench. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. He crossed the well of the court, walking past the court reporter, past the bailiff's station, until he stood directly between the 2 tables. He was towering over Richard Sterling. Stand up, Caldwell commanded. Richard stood, looking like a schoolboy called to the principal's office. Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Look at her. Caldwell pointed a shaking finger at me. Look at the woman you discarded. Richard looked. I was weeping silently, my hand covering my mouth. Do you see her eyes? Caldwell asked softly. Do you see the gray, the steel? Richard frowned. He looked at me, then back at the judge. He blinked. The realization hit him like a physical blow. The eyes were identical. The shape of the jaw. The way they both held their posture when cornered. Oh my God, Richard whispered, the blood draining from his face. Caldwell turned to the gallery, addressing the reporters directly. For the record, Caldwell announced, his voice booming without the microphone. Mr. Staling asked why I care so much about a waitress from Queens. He assumed she had no one. He assumed she was trash to be swept away. Caldwell walked over to my table. He placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. I leaned into his touch, burying my face in his arm. He was wrong, Caldwell said. Bella Staling is not just a waitress. She is Bella Caldwell, my daughter. The courtroom exploded. It was instantaneous chaos. Reporters jumped to their feet. Flashes went off like strobe lights. Questions were shouted over one another. Judge, are you saying you're her father? Is this a mistrial? Did you plan this? Richard Staling slumped back into his chair, his eyes wide and vacant. He looked at his lawyer, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was already packing his briefcase, shaking his head. You're dead, Thorne whispered to Richard. Politically, corporately, you're dead. You just insulted the daughter of the most powerful judge in the state on camera while your mistress committed a felony. Judge Caldwell raised a hand, and the room quieted down, though the energy was still electric. Mr. Staling, Caldwell said, looking down at the broken billionaire. You came into my house. You kicked my child. And you thought your money would protect you. Caldwell leaned in close, his face inches from Richard's. You have no idea, Caldwell whispered. What kind of war you just started. The courtroom erupted. It wasn't just a murmur anymore. It was a roar. The press gallery was a sea of flashing lights and shouting reporters. Judge Caldwell is her father. Did you know about this, Mr. Staling? Richard Staling stood frozen, his face a mask of absolute horror. He looked at the man he had feared for years, the hangman of the New York judicial system, and then at the woman he had treated like garbage. The connection was impossible to miss now. The same defiance, the same quiet strength. This is a mistrial. Marcus Thorne shouted, though his voice cracked. Conflict of interest. You can't preside over this case if you are her father. This is highly unethical. Judge Caldwell smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. You are absolutely correct, Mr. Thorne. Caldwell said, his voice cutting through the noise. Which is why I am recusing myself from the final judgment of the divorce decree effective immediately. Richard let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Thank God. We get a new judge. We can fix this. However, Caldwell continued, raising a finger. While I cannot rule on the asset division, I do have the authority to rule on the contempt of court and the assault that occurred within my jurisdiction. Ms. Vance has already been processed, and the video evidence of that assault, well, that is now part of the public record. Caldwell gestured to the back of the room, and as you can see, the press has already uploaded it. Richard whipped around. The reporters were typing furiously. One cameraman gave Richard a thumbs up, signaling he was live on air. Furthermore, Caldwell stepped closer to Richard, dropping his voice so only the parties at the tables could hear. I am handing this case over to Judge Margaret Holloway. She is a close friend of mine. She is also a woman who raised 3 daughters alone. Do you think she will look kindly on a man who stood by while his mistress kicked his wife? Do you think she will look kindly on a man who lied about his assets under oath? Richard turned to Thorne. Marcus, fix this. Do something. Thorne began packing his briefcase with shaky hands. Mr. Staling, there is nothing to fix. You just committed social and corporate suicide on a live stream. Sterling tech stock is probably plummeting as we speak. If we go to trial with Judge Holloway, she will strip you bare. She will give Bella 80% just to make a point. So, what do I do? Richard hissed. Thorne pulled out a blank settlement agreement. He slid it across the table toward me. We settle, Thorne said defeatedly. Right now. Give her what she wants. All of it. Before the board of directors calls and fires you. Richard looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. For the first time in years, he really looked at me. He saw the woman who had held his head when he cried over failed prototypes. He saw the woman who had skipped meals so he could buy server pots. He saw the beauty he had been too blind and too greedy to appreciate. "Bella," Richard said, his voice breaking. He tried to summon the charm that had worked on her a decade ago. He walked around the table, approaching me with his hands out. "Bella, baby, look at this mess. We let it get out of control." "Jessica," she meant nothing. She was just a distraction. I was stressed. I watched him approach. I didn't flinch. I just stood there, flanked by my father. "We can fix this," Richard pleaded. "I'll fire Jessica. I'll make it up to you. We were a team. Remember? You and me against the world. Don't let your dad ruin what we built. Come home, Bella. The penthouse is empty without you." He reached out to touch my arm. I stepped back. I looked at his hand as if it were a poisonous snake. "You don't get it, do you, Rick?" I said softly. "Get what?" "You didn't build styling tech," I said, my voice gaining strength. "We didn't build it. I built you. I built your confidence. I built your home. I built the foundation you stood on, and you took a sledgehammer to it." I picked up the settlement papers Thorne had slid over. I grabbed a pen from the table. "I don't want you back," I said. "I don't want your love. I don't want your apologies." I wrote a figure on the paper, a very large figure. I signed my name with a flourish and tossed it at Richard's chest. "I want half," I said. 50% of the company, 50% of the assets. And I want the penthouse. You can have the garage in Queens. Maybe you can find another waitress to save you. But I doubt it. Richard looked at the paper. I was demanding everything he had terrified her with losing. "Sign it." Judge Caldwell rumbled from beside me. "Or I make sure the district attorney looks very closely into those offshore accounts you mentioned earlier." Richard looked at his lawyer. Thorne nodded. "Sign it, Richard. It's over." With a trembling hand, Richard Sterling signed away half his empire. He dropped the pen, looking like a deflated balloon. He was still a millionaire, technically, but he was no longer a king. He was a man who had lost his queen. Richard turned and walked out of the courtroom, head hung low, ignoring the shouting reporters. He was alone. I stood in the quiet of the courtroom after the chaos had filtered out. It was just me and the judge now. I turned to face him. Arthur Caldwell looked older up close. The lines on his face were deep. He looked tired. "You came," I said, tears finally spilling over. "I never should have let you go," Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out hesitantly and placed a hand on my shoulder. "I was a stubborn old fool. I thought if I was hard on you, you'd come back. Instead, I drove you away." "I was scared to call," I admitted. "I thought you'd say, 'I told you so.'" "I did tell you so." Arthur half smiled, a sad, weary look. "But I take no joy in being right. I only take joy in seeing that you are safe and that you have your fire back." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I kept this," he said, "for 15 years. I opened it. Inside was a small silver locket I had left on my dress of the night I ran away. Inside was a picture of me and my mother. "Come home, Elle," my father said. "Not to your room, but to dinner. Let me buy you a meal. Let me be your dad again." I closed the box and clutched it to my chest. I looked at the door where Richard had exited, broken and defeated. Then I looked at my father, strong and repentant. "Okay," I whispered, "but you're paying and no lectures about my shoes." Arthur Caldwell laughed, a genuine, booming sound that filled the room. "Deal." As they walked out of the courtroom, arm in arm, I didn't limp. I walked with the stride of a woman who owned $500 million and, more importantly, who had found the one thing money couldn't buy, her own worth. And that, my friends, is how Bella Sterling went from a discarded waitress to the owner of a tech empire, all because she dared to make the one phone call she was most afraid of. Richard Sterling learned the hard way that you never know who someone really is until you push them too far. He thought he was kicking a stray cat, but he was actually waking a sleeping lioness. It makes you wonder how many people are walking around with power they haven't used yet. So, tell me, what do you think? Would you have forgiven your father after 15 years of silence? Or was the judge just doing his job? And did Richard deserve to lose half? Or should he have lost everything? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge and justice, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who needs a win, and don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching.